for it.
Okay. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now
That's a good one to have up first. Yeah.
okay. So I just leave it there until you tell me to go away?
Yeah, until Rick tells me it's time to start.
Okay. Okay.
It's about time. We don't usually wait till after 5 after. People will probably
Oh.
join us later, but
Okay, so the reason I wanted to put this up is because it is one of the most potent quotes that I have come across. It is also Black History Month, which is just by the by, but this is something that really stops and makes one think. Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhuman because it often results in physical death. And we often hear it a little misquoted. We hear injustice in health care, and we hear most inhumane, but those were not his words. His words during this speech, which was before, I think, the second medical health conference in Chicago, which is where this was made, he chose his words very deliberately. And he said, in health is shocking and most humane, because the term health is a little wider than healthcare. And he didn't say inhumane, he said inhuman. And when questioned about that, his response seemed to say, condensed here, that inhumane are things that humans do that are not representative of what they can do. But when you say it's inhuman, what you're saying is humans cannot do these things. It disqualifies you from being human when you do these things. So this is a much more powerful statement than I think we have ever realized. And we've all probably seen this quote a million times. So if Mike, if you can take that quote down and put me back up, I can go ahead and start. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. So let me get back to, so I am just delighted to be able to do this. I love talking to people about healthcare, universal healthcare in specific. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for attending. And the question that always comes up for me is, what do I have to say to you folks? You're active, you're informed. This is what Rick tells me. You're active and you're informed and you're already in some senses on board with looking at these ideas. So you've been working on holy needs, and we'll talk more about that, for a very long time. And I was gently reminded that we all need to nourish our connection between faith and works. And that when we're talking about do social justice issues belong in a church, we're really talking about that. Is that a good way to connect our faith with our works? And if not, why not? And if it is, why is it? So that's basically what we're going to be circling around today. So I want to just say that if we've said that we have a wing of faith and a wing of action. But if you use your arms for that, and maybe you can try this if you want to. You can take yourself off video if you don't want to have people see this. But really, I'm just going to ask you to hold out one arm as faith and one arm as action, and feel where those two arms meet. Okay? They meet at our heart and our spine. That's where they actually meet. And that's what it takes to do God's work. So let's take a look in the book itself. And before we actually go to that book, I want to say Archbishop Desmond Tutu wrote, "God Has a Dream." Have any of you read that? This is a wonderful book. He is so full of heart and so full of faith, and without a doubt, full of works. He wrote, he wrote God Has a Dream. And in it, this dream of God's is spelled out scripturally. And it is in both the Hebrew and the New Testaments. In fact, you could say the entirety of the Bible in reality is several accounts of us struggling to understand and live out God's dream, only to get lost and feel the numbness or the pain or the terror or the fury of being lost, and then rediscovering it again. The dream, that is. It's a dream of love. It's a dream of restorative justice and healing. So let's open the cover to the Bible. And pretty much right off the bat, we find ourselves lost my place here. So I have to find myself. Pretty much right off the bat, at least after the fall, we see God looking for Abel, right? There's been this big thing with Cain and Abel. And he happened, this is Genesis, chapter 4, verse 9. He happens on Cain and asks him where his brother is. And Cain, being not unlike you and I, comes up with a spiritually disastrous answer. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, it turns out the answer is unequivocally yes. And it remains yes for the remainder of the Judeo-Christian scriptures. There's never a wavering of this. There's never a time when we aren't our brother's keeper. So there we've got our basis for what we're going to do in church with our energy. We're going to take care of our brother and sister. A little later on in those first books, this is Leviticus 25, and I'll give you all these scripture quotations, except I didn't put in Leviticus 25 on that for some reason when you see that slide. God explains the Jubilee. This is the year of release. This is God's dream for us. This is what Desmond Tutu's writing on, Bishop Tutu's writing on. The Jubilee is basically a do-over. Debts are forgiven, people are reconciled, communities are healed, and so forth in this lifetime, here and now. No waiting for heaven in this lifetime. Prophets later rail about the colossal consequences of greed and corruption, about stealing from widows and children and the lame and the halt. All these people who are us, because we all, no matter how well off we are and how invulnerable we feel, we're all them. Okay, so taking even more money for yourself when those widows and orphans, the afflicted, the oppressed, the ill are leading miserable, shortened, sorrow-soaked lives. But God has a dream where we're part of his beloved community where holy needs are met. So you might be saying, wait, what's a holy need? Or you might use that term in your church a lot. I don't know. Jesus makes it abundantly clear in Matthew 25, that just right at the end of that chapter, we all know that backwards and forwards. It's the motto for most of our social service work: feed, clothe, visit, and later on he says heal. Because that's what human bodies need. We are all incarnated. We're all put in a body. And because God put us in a body that has needs, we need to fulfill those needs. We need to meet those needs because they're basic for us to go about doing God's work. Okay, so these are the needs we and Jesus all have because we're all incarnated. We have a body and therefore bodily needs. And that those needs need to be met. When we tend to each other's needs, we tend to his. That's why they're holy. They are his needs. So then we come to Luke the physician. We're going to skip over so many other things. We could stop almost anywhere once we get to the New Testament. We come to Luke the physician who fills his gospel with story after story of Jesus's healings. But it all starts with Luke 4, 16 to 23, where he's the reader for that morning in the temple, and they hand him the scrolls, and it's Isaiah 61. Okay. And Isaiah 61 is about the New Jerusalem. But Jesus says, that's me, and the time is now. Here's a bit of Isaiah and he's describing his mission on earth. And here's a bit of Isaiah 65 later on that glorious new creation, the New Jerusalem, the year of the Lord's favor, the year of Jubilee, that we don't usually read. Now, I'm Episcopalian, and we follow a 3-year rotation through the lectionary. And I'll tell you, there are many times when I'm not exactly paying attention to, especially the Old Testament readings. I'll find my mind sort of going on. But this one I never remembered. So I'm going to read it to you. This is a description of the New Jerusalem. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and delight in my people. No more shall the sound of weeping be heard in it, or the cry of distress. No more shall there be in it an infant that lives but a few days, or an old person who does not live out a lifetime. This is the New Jerusalem. No more shall there be babies that don't even reach their first birthday, or people who die because their needs weren't met, die early. And Jesus immediately goes out right after that and starts healing and feeding people, breaking laws to do so, repeatedly having to defend himself, right, for meeting holy needs. He makes this very clear. He goes out and he's doing wheat right there in front of his critics. And they say, what are you doing? That's forbidden on the Sabbath. And he makes it very clear that that doesn't hold. Church rules, church doctrine, church tradition does not supersede holy need. We have to keep that in mind as we go forward here. I'm glad I'm seeing some people nodding. And so he goes out and does this. He's telling his disciples they can do everything that he does and more just a little bit later on in this. We tend to forget that. We think Jesus is the great healer. Well, that is absolutely true. But what we forget is that he said, let's see. Oh, I can't find it here. That his people can do everything he can do and more. And you find later on in some of the letters from, I think, Peter, for example, recounting, going out and doing exactly that, healing the masses when they're out preaching after Jesus is dead and gone and risen. So Jesus tells us not only can we must, or there's a spiritual loss there for us. So the question becomes for us then, well, I'm just one person and there are so many. How can we heal them? And who's worth healing? And now we're in Luke again in chapter 10. And you know where we're going with this. This is the Good Samaritan story. This answers all those questions for us and more. Remember, before you actually get to the Good Samaritan story, the Pharisees are there and they're trying to trap Jesus into saying something that they're going to be able to crucify him for, or at least put him permanently out of business for. And one of the Pharisees asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, I don't know. Well, he doesn't say, I don't know. He says, tell me. And the Pharisee says, love your God and love your neighbor. So far, so good. Then the Pharisee, wanting to show off just a little bit how smart he was, says, but who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And Jesus, instead of answering, tells a healthcare parable. this isn't something that actually happened. He says, I'm going to tell you a story, a parable. So there's a badly injured and bloodied man laying down the road. Along comes a priest who can't afford to become ritually unclean, literally comes up to the man and skirts him. So he won't touch him because blood makes him unclean. And then he's got a 2-week process before he can do this. And he's hurrying to the temple in Jerusalem to do something. Okay. Well, that's us. Because we literally skirt the issue of the people under the bridge on Market Street in Salem at I-5, the homeless encampment of 125 people huddled there, many of whom are sick, mentally ill, physically ill, broken bodies, and we drive by. We skirt the issue. Of course we do. It's an overwhelming problem, and we haven't found a way to meet it. The next man who comes along is a temple assistant. He's a Levite. Well, that's a temple assistant. That's a Sunday school teacher. That's me up here. That's Mike running the technology here. That's Rick organizing this. That's the choir director. That's the people who are lay readers or whatever. That's all of us who get deeply involved in the church. We're all these temple assistants. Who does much the same thing? Lastly comes a Samaritan who will make the injured Jew ritually unclean if he helps him, but who will also be sort of unclean himself if he does that. And he doesn't seem to even hesitate. He cleans his wounds and binds them up. That's providing EMT service. Then he transports him on his own donkey, we could call that ambulance service, to the inn, which is a field hospital. All over the Middle East, there weren't hospitals. There were what we might call field hospitals, which was any place you've turned up, that became the place where you were treated and healed. And then they spend the night there. And he tends to him. He's now an ER doc or nurse. The next morning, he tells the innkeeper to take good care of the injured man, paid his bill, said, that's 2 denarii. That's 2 days' wages. Now I looked that up. That's about $400 to $500, 2 days' wages in our economy today. Thank Google for that one. It says he'll come back and pay the rest of whatever it took to get his patient healed. That's the work of the insurance industry, which may or may not do it, and goes on his way. Jesus turns to the Pharisee and says, who is the real neighbor of the beaten up man? And the beaten up man was, well, first of all, he couldn't actually say the Pharisee because it was too hard. The Pharisees could be given no credit. They were the despised people. So he says, the one who showed mercy. And for our purposes, that's really a much better answer. None of us are Samaritans. We're pretty solidly, if I can look at the faces here, probably pretty much Northern European, not very close to Samaria. And so here is what happens. Jesus says, the one who shows mercy, and Jesus then tells the Pharisee, us, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. Well, the priest and the temple assistant certainly could have done the same thing, but they didn't. But we can. And this is how it ties up with the subject today. We can. That's what universal health care is all about. And that's why the Episcopal Church, which has someplace between 15 and 17,000 members in the state, that's why they backed a resolution to see healthcare through to the end using Healthcare for All Oregon, which is a nonprofit 501c3, it's a nonpartisan organization, as a vehicle to help this happen. Because the values of that organization and the values of the church align pretty completely. So here's a way that you can make sure that healthcare touches everyone who needs it in our state. We're only talking about Oregon, in our state, and isn't dependent on your pocketbook, your social status, whether you have a pre-existing or whatever, other than your holy need. Your healthcare is only dependent on your holy need with universal healthcare. So here's a way right here, right now, where we can participate in God's dream for us all. Here's where the credo meets action, right at our hearts and our backbones. Our hearts sometimes seem to have been created to break when we're in the presence of suffering, whatever kind that is, of suffering, of holy need, where we can feel paralyzed or moved to action. But this takes us directly to James, who says, and here's a man who does not mince words. He says, what good is it to say you have faith when you don't do anything to show it? If you know someone who doesn't have food or clothing, you shouldn't just say, I hope all goes well for you. I hope you will be warm and have plenty to eat. He goes on in verse 21 to 24 to say, our ancestor Abraham pleased God by putting his son on the altar to sacrifice him. He proved his faith was real by deeds, and that's how he became God's friend, end quote. I didn't just make, that's actually scripture. That's how he became God's friend. Faith wasn't the measure for God. Faith put into action was. So to sum up, yeah, I'm my brother's keeper. And yes, all those others out there that I see are my neighbors. Our beloved community, you and I have an opportunity to meet holy needs with universal health care, which we can only afford if we do it basically in the way that it's been proven to work most in the rest of the world. We get the blessing of living out the contemporary Good Samaritan story and God's dream right here and now. So blessed be God forever. So Mike, could you show slide 2, please? We'll just go through these slides really quickly. That's slide 1. Let me get this off. So you're probably going to want to know why it is that a church could get involved with an organization that has been so on a topic so politicized, and that's because the topic is not political. The topic is Christian, and the topic is nonpartisan. This organization looks for these things, which are universality, equity, accountability, transparency, participation, and public good. Those are all biblical values. So that's one of the things we do. Can we go to the next slide, Mike? And here are the scripture references. There's one after Genesis that I used, which was Leviticus 25. That's the New Jerusalem. That's the year of release, the Jubilee. But that's re-quoted, and it goes all over through the scriptures. How about the next one? Oh, I love this one. This is one that I leave with every church that I speak to. And when I go back, if I have an occasion to go back, I find it posted on the board. And I will leave this with you. And so you can copy it off if you want to from whoever will be holding that at your church, probably Rick. Okay, let's see the next one. Oh, okay, that's it. Okay. So now for discussion.
Everything crystal clear? No questions? That's such a thorough discussion, Pamela.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Lots of good context.
And that's the thing, because we can get the important thing for our endeavor in the Episcopal Church is not to get drawn into partisanship, into partisan arguments, because this is not a partisan topic.
Mhm.
It simply isn't. It's a very human one. When we talk about meeting holy needs, we're walking on sacred ground, not partisan grounds. And any discussion starts going away from there and be connected back in that sense. Okay. You can say, well, that's let the politicians deal with this. I want to go back to this piece of legislation. The legislation facing us right now, well, there are two pieces. One is a declaration that healthcare is a human right. We've been talking about this. I've been talking about this for the whole time.
Mhm.
Human right. It comes with having a body. Okay, the other one is to keep the task force that's devising how Oregon's universal health care will be designed. And that because of COVID, they're off schedule, and it just needs to be, what's the word, Rick? Re-upped and given an extension of time. So those are the two things. Those aren't partisan issues. That has to do with how are we going to take care of the human needs in a state that has a huge, huge number of people without adequate ways. That doesn't mean that most of the people in the state don't have insurance. The big problem with people right now is that people can't afford to use their insurance, even if they have it. That's somewhere, I saw a figure on that, and I'm not exactly sure of the accuracy of this, but it's in the ballpark. It was between 40 and 60% of the people decline healthcare or ration their meds. They ration their healthcare, which includes meds, because they can't afford the expense of doing what has been advised.
Mhm.
Part of that is that due to the insurance companies having no investment in prevention beyond what they're mandated to have, we don't have people just with guidance and encouragement taking care of themselves and support as people do. And this primarily for me is diabetics. That being a diabetic is a hard road. My family's riven with diabetes. And it's a hard one, even with all the support my family has had for generations. My great-grandmother was one of the first ones to get insulin shots. And her twin daughters were trained, my grandmother and her sister were trained to give those insulin shots. That was beginning of the 1900s, I think, end of the 1800s.
No.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And so diabetes is no new topic. And it's still a struggle for people in my family. Even though it's known, it's not feared. People know what to do, and it's still hard. Imagine for someone who has no experience. Yeah. So, Ruth, I see you.
I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, you brought up insulin. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
My mother worked with Dr. Fred Banting in Canada. He is the one that received the Nobel Prize, and she worked with him getting insulin. And he deplored anyone making money off of insulin, so he sold it to Canada for $1. and that's all he took for, he had the Nobel Prize though on top of that, but,
Yeah.
but still, you know, it was not expected to really be charged the huge charges for insulin. It's really a crime what's happened with it. But what I've heard lately too, on another topic was the COVID expense and what's happening with COVID. So many people have not seen a doctor and died because they feared the cost of being helped with health care, the expense of it. And they're coming out almost now with numbers of the people who have died, actually died because the people never sought any health care assistance. And I think more and more we need to find out what the true message is there, because to think that people would not get any health care at all, not try to even, because of the expense, is really shocking.
It is shocking. And what's more shocking is that we alone among all the other Western wealthy
Country.
industrialized countries still tie our insurance to employment. So many people have lost, and I had that figure someplace with me today, but you can look it up. It's pretty easily accessible. How many people in the US have lost jobs and therefore health insurance?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to move that out a little bit to how many people were in that family.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up with just an alarming number of people that have no longer access to, let alone underinsurance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they can't get any.
Mm-hmm.
When they do finally get a crisis coverage policy, catastrophic, I think we call them, they're paying an enormous amount of money for what they get because they're not going to be able to use hardly any of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have insurance companies who are just saying, hand me the money, come, give me the money, give me the money. And one of the things we have to look at is, where does that money go? Well, do you like to go to the Modus Center to watch the Blazers play? Do you like to go to Providence Arena? I think that's what it's called, where the Timbers play soccer. Well, where do you think that's money that came out of our pockets that have those two kinds of insurance?
Mm-hmm.
Came out directly out of our pockets and went into that.
Mm-hmm.
It goes directly out of our pockets into high-paid executives. It goes directly out of our pocket. Oh, I'm getting on a soapbox. Okay, I'm going to shut up.
Can I add one more thing? I'm sorry to take so much time, but I think if there ever was a year where people were all alert to healthcare and what is happening to people, it's this year with the COVID.
Yes.
This is the year that we could get single payer healthcare on the ballot. I don't know of any other year that I've lived through where it is so important to people to have health insurance. And so this is really an important year in healthcare and for our campaigns. And I don't see any urgency to get it done this year. And I'm sorry to say, but I think there is.
You know, Ruth, you're absolutely right. I'm 75 now, and I have never seen or heard of in my lifetime. I mean, before my lifetime, I am not even going to speak for that, but in the past 75 years, I have heard of nothing that rivals this in terms of these issues. And one of the things that I think is very important is that we know what we can do. And that is we can contact not just our legislators, but the people on the task force who are writing up the healthcare that we will have.
Mm-hmm.
we can write them. They need our support. There's a legislative task force, and I can get you all this information, but I see people here who have it, like Janet, I think you have it. And Ruth, I'm pretty sure you have it. I know you do, Rick, and Mike, you do. I don't.
Actually, it's available on hcao.org. I want to make sure that people remember this. A lot of
Yes.
people in this group, regulars, have said, what can I do? What else can I do besides learn about it? This is what you can do. You can go to hcao.org and there's a link to submit testimony to the task force and the tag groups, this specialty area groups. And there's also, very importantly, a new feature. There's a statement of support. It's been there for a long time, but now you have the option to sign the statement of support as a member of the faith community. We want to encourage everybody to do that so we can build up a network of people around the state who are members of the faith community, and hopefully ultimately we'll start working together. The Faith Caucus of HCAO is going to use that so that eventually we can send out occasional messages saying, here's what others are doing, here's what you can do in your faith community. So please go to hcao.org and sign that faith statement of support and consider sending in some information to the task force. It's not just testimony, like you have to think of something original to say about why we have this. Tell your own story or the story of someone you know about why we need it. That's all they're really looking for. Thanks.
Yeah, and you can even do more. You can join HCAO. Your church can join HCAO. You individually can join HCAO, because that also helps support the organization that's going out there and doing. Actually, one person said it to me this way, and I'm not sure this is exactly how I'd say it, but there's a sentiment behind it. The church has to maintain a remove from the sausage making. And HCAO can help us do that. So for many people, that's, we can't always grab our Bibles and flip through all the scriptural references and say, yes, this is what we could do. But we can say, we can wholeheartedly support a secular organization who is nonpartisan, who has the same values, principles, and purposes that we espouse as a church. We get to do that because we get to be nonpartisan. Kathy, I see your hand.
Yeah, my connection's been poor, so if I garble, let me know. If you can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, there was a number of folks from the Catholic faith, and their concern is that their Catholic bishops and priests are this politically because of abortion being included. And do you have any thoughts on how to assist those folks for whom that becomes painful?
Yes, we actually have a member, actually co-chair of the Faith Caucus, I believe, Lisa, who is Catholic, and she works with this issue. She's part of HCAO, a leader, even when she's not leading the HCAO Faith Caucus with Rick. And she goes out and she has ways of saying, I know this is a right to life. I know this is a matter of respect for all forms of life, but do you realize how many more lives are lost when there isn't abortion available? You realize how many more? And she has all that information. And if you were interested in that and wanted to explore that further, I imagine, Rick, how would she contact Lisa?
I can get her the information.
Yeah,
I was
that might,
Yeah, she's
And
got my
maybe more
email.
of you are interested in that topic too, because it's worth respecting the topic. None of us don't
Mhm.
respect life.
Right.
Yeah. None of
I
us.
just know that for some, that it's going to be a way for people to politicize this movement. And for some, it's a genuine challenge.
It is. It is. Yeah. This is the thing. We've gotten in this pickle because HCAO and the Episcopal Church originally, for me, formed this partnership, and the partnership was formed because we passed a resolution at our annual convention to back universal health care, single.
Mhm.
Well, that was but left a little fuzzy, the actual means of having it, but by joining and saying we will do this through HCAO, that clarified the matter right there, because HCAO is unequivocally single payer. So in this process, we have had to really thread the needle on a lot of issues. But one of the biggest stumbling blocks for us in trying to keep this nonpartisan is that then the Democratic Party went and endorsed us and made it their primary platform point, which was perfect for anyone who wanted to politicize the issue. And believe me, the opposition to universal health care has jumped on board and hammered that one home. So, it isn't that we became the progressive organization that is political. It's that just given our position, it was made political, and our job is continually to depoliticize it and say, this is our faith that brings us to this point, not our political.
Pamela, I'd like to encourage other people to speak to this issue rather than just a dialogue.
Okay,
I mean,
yes.
I have
Thank
a
you.
point I'd like to make, and that is that when I hear this argument, what I say is, look, you may be against abortion. I respect that. That's your moral position. That's your belief. But do you want to deny health care to millions of people, and mostly poor people, just so that you can prevent some abortions while rich can still get them? You want people to die of preventable disease and complications of accidents over no fault of their own, just so other people can't get an abortion? Is that really your values? I don't necessarily put it that bluntly, but
Those are good points.
that's a point I try to make with people. And I know there are other ways to deal with this too. Mike walked away, but he actually wrote a paper on I think it was to a specific priest. Anyway, it was the moral argument for supporting healthcare, despite the fact that or universal healthcare, despite the fact that it might mean funding abortions. Mike, do you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, it may reach some people to sort of reinforce Pamela's comment, where the access to healthcare will save lives, and other countries who do have universal healthcare have lower abortion rates. So if that's the ultimate goal, please consider universal healthcare as one way to achieve that, to reduce abortions. The other argument is a little more circuitous, but it is that if the destruction of life was the prime reason that that people of certain faiths oppose abortion, they should be incensed that there are so many natural miscarriages, and should be fighting every way they can to do research to avoid miscarriages. The numbers are something like, only, maybe Bob can help me on this one, a small percentage of ova reach the uterus, and a small number are fertilized. Many are lost, And so you could sing the same logic. Let's prevent all types of miscarriages. That would be our ultimate goal, which is impractical. So I can send my exact words to the group that might make more sense than I am right now.
Yeah, and anybody that wants it, I have it saved too, so you can, I think everybody here has my email or access to it. Yeah, everybody here does. Paula?
So I think one of the issues that we run into both within the church and in the general population is not so much an objection to universal health care, but when we start talking about a one-payer system, then we get into the partisanship arguments. And could you maybe address that a little bit?
Pamela? Let me address it since she already spoke to that, because I have a different opinion. HCAO, the members have traditionally talked about single payer system, but in fact, that's not the official position. The official position at this point is that we support a universal healthcare system with the characteristics that were listed on that second slide. If you can do that in any other way besides a single payer system, that's not different than what we're supporting. It will no doubt be more expensive if you come up with a different way, but it might be more politically palatable. That's one argument, and it's a valid argument, whether you agree or not. So actually, HCAO does not say it has to be a single payer system.
And you're absolutely right with that, Rick. There's a book that is called The Healing of America. Have any of you heard of that?
Mhm.
Yeah, and Mike has. So The Healing of America is written by T.R. Reid, who's been a correspondent for Washington
Oh, yeah.
Post forever. And he was given an assignment, or he created, I think he really wanted this assignment. He was granted it to go overseas and survey how other countries do universal health care. And so he did, and he came back, and he has a bad shoulder. His definition of bad shoulder is I can't golf anymore. But he's retired, so it doesn't interfere with his sitting at a keyboard and doing his writing. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't affect him any other way except for discomfort and not being able to golf. So he went overseas to see what, after he had been told that he could have a shoulder replacement here if he wanted it. He went overseas to see what else people could do. And he went to a number of countries. After having done some research, he had selected 5 or 6 countries as exemplar of one of the forms of healthcare, universal healthcare provision. In that process, he went to have his shoulder treated in every single one of those.
Oh, really?
And he got various answers, but in the end, nobody was willing to give him a shoulder replacement because he didn't need it. The place that gave him the most relief from his shoulder was India, which must have been just some kind of a control group country because they do not have universal health care. And he was given all sorts of Ayurvedic and ancient methods, massage, all these sorts of things for his shoulder. And it helped more than anything else that he'd had in the United States or the other countries. He decided not to have his shoulder replaced. Now, the point of that is that he went to Japan, where universal healthcare is administered through big companies. The big companies have their own hospitals and doctors and things like that. So you go into one of those companies, and if you're not covered by any of that, the government will cover you. You can go to Germany, where there are insurance companies and the insurance companies are very tightly regulated. They cannot compete with the government's with a plan that highly regulates what is provided in the very good basic healthcare plan. They can't compete with that, but they can offer things like elective surgery or faster surgery or private rooms or Viagra or whatever. They can do a lot of different things that are non-essential for basic good health, but they cannot compete with the basic package. And what they can charge is regulated. And the consequence of breaking that pact is significant. And it varies from country to country. Switzerland has a similar package. They could go to France or Spain or Italy or to British Columbia or to Great Britain or to Canada. And each place they find a little bit different way to do this. And so Rick is absolutely correct. There are the values, the principles, and the purposes that, that are put out by Healthcare for All Oregon. And most of the people who've been working on this have been through this song and dance so many times. Everybody who goes through that comes down to, well, the most economical way, the highest quality way is to just go ahead and do single payer. And so the organization tends only to talk in terms of course it's going to be single payer if that's what we want. The lowest cost, the highest quality, the most people covered. Of course that's going to be single payer, but that doesn't mean that that's what we'll have. And it doesn't mean that HCAO will cut them off at the knees if they come up with something else. Mike, what were you going to say?
A couple of things just to follow up. I put my version of abortion is not murder in the chat. So if people know how to save chat, they can get a link to that.
Oh,
But
good. Thank you.
I wanted to point out that Italy, which is predominantly Catholic, and has the Pope, who is strongly in favor of universal health care. But that country tolerates the official prohibition on abortion and yet has universal health care. So there are models we can follow. Somehow they figure out how to do that.
That's great. And just as long as we're back to that, another argument, and that is that abortion, the question of abortion is only going to be resolved through the courts and the legislature. So you can separate the two issues. You don't have to lump them together. And that's why, in my opinion, it's immoral to deny health care to some people just so others, and primarily poor people, can't get access to abortions. But if they did come up with a system like that, there are other ways to fund abortions too. So that's a separate issue. I want to make one more point. I know some people may have to drop off because we're at 2:00 just about. But I want to make sure that people know that next week, since we just got done talking about universal health care in different countries, next week we're going to have Dr. Professor Chunwei Chi, who is a renowned public health specialist who is going to talk to us about some of those different models. And in particular, he's going to talk to us about how Taiwan got through the COVID crisis better than just about anybody. And a lot of that had to do with their universal health care system. So,
Rick, for clarification purposes, it's not next week, but it's 2 weeks away. We're the second and
yes, I'm sorry. I meant in our next session. Yes, thanks, Bert.
I haven't said much, but you know, I've been for the single payer plan and all that, but it's appalling to me that how many people base their vote for president, base their whole life on the political views entirely on whether somebody believes and supports abortions or doesn't support abortions. I mean, it's like monolithic. Does that candidate support abortion, and they won't vote for them, don't listen to anything else. I mean, that's such an important thing. Somebody comes up to me and says, you support abortions. And I said, I do not support abortions. I support education so there's no need for an abortion. It's always good to have a one-liner, something ready to come back on them for, which kind of takes the wind out of their sails.
Exactly, and that is a technique. I'm a counselor, a psychotherapist, and when I'm teaching people to enter into strenuous dialogue, that's one of the things, Bert, that I want people to do is have ready before they ever go in a one-liner that they can go back to, that they can stand behind, that buys them a little time.
Mhm.
Just buys them a little time to think of the next thing they're going to say. And that's a great one-liner for that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Rick, would you be able to send out a copy of the slides and also the links that Michael has put on the chat for those of us that don't know how to save our chat?
Let me see if I can figure it out.
Yeah, just
Google Drive. Okay, I think I just saved it.
as a,
If necessary, Rick, I can get you the chat notes from the system once we close out.
Okay,
I mean,
I'm experimenting because
it
this is,
it automatically for me.
But I think the slides that Pamela has would be really helpful as well, particularly, well, the whole works, I think, really. We can pick and choose what we want to use at any point in time that way.
I do have to sort of apologize for those. I am such a rank beginner and maybe even a little computer phobic, someone might say, that those are put to, take those and reformat them. For heaven's sakes, reformat them if you want to, because they can be prettier than that.
I thought they were just fine.
Well, thank you.
yeah, Tim, please do send me that. I get to the Google Drive and everything, but I don't see where they're supposed to go. I don't know how to put them there, so. If they're there, I didn't see them.
Pamela, thank you for grounding healthcare for all as the basis for religious life, for faith. I think it's very, your unequivocal clarity is very refreshing. And I think it cuts through so many of the concerns or fears that people might have. And thank you.
I totally agree.
Oh, and those of you who are in other churches, you can invite Pamela to speak either virtually or in person when we meet again in person.
Yes, this recording will, I want to make this available for people to take back to your churches. And I see this as being something that can be done without this after conversation, or this after someone else's grounding in scripture might be a good way to start a conversation.
Mhm.
But I want it to be well used. We've put some time into this. You and I have put some time into this today. And if we can reach more people with our conversations and with our thoughts, then that's the whole purpose of it. So Rick will have access to that. Mike has access to so many materials through his work with HCAO that he can supplement a lot of other things. And I would go to some of the sites and see some of the work that's been done, like videos, short videos. There's a less than 9-minute video on how we got this to.
Uh-oh, she froze.
Uh-oh. While she's frozen, I will just say you can go to YouTube. Healthcare for All Oregon has its own channel, and you can find a lot of those great videos there. Is that right, Mike? You just search for Healthcare for All Oregon in YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay.